Questions. How do we understand the fractures of the economy that threaten women's everyday existence in rural areas? And I think let's first deal with those fractures, and then we can speak about models or practical examples that you might want to share. What is new given the brutal realities? You know, we've got major achievements and celebrations, but on the ground, there are also brutal realities. And are there things that we can learn from and take away to really strengthen the AU vision going forward for the strategy for 2063? So shall we first start with the fundamental question of the fractures of the economy that threaten our very existence? And I think, you know, we speak rural areas, but, you know, we also speak in general, but particularly where many of our women are located. So shall we start with you, Ria, or who wants to go first?
It's perfect for me to start.
Okay.
The one big word that I shall pose to all of us here is that the women are excluded. Because wherever they are, even the economy that, the economic ecosystem that they find themselves in rural areas, who recognizes it? They are existing because they have found ways of coping and found ways of doing particular things. So if there's one thing that I would like to pose today is that let us include the women, because we are writing of a very essential part of our own society. Sitting where I'm sitting and coming from where I'm coming from, I'm very, very, very happy to be part of an organization that is unapologetic about being activists to include these women. And in many ways, first and foremost, they are sitting with assets in those communities. Some of them, they're not even accessible to them. You find an old woman who has access to a social grant. But because of factors beyond her, not having an identity document, not knowing that that asset is available to her, she's excluded. What we are doing at WDB, at a very, very, very basic level, is to ensure that through our asset-based, community-based development, we start saying what are the assets that are there in this community, the land that, you know, the women have been talking about here. How do we make sure that those women have access to the very assets? Because it is the very first hurdle to jump before we even start talking about other resources. It is important to also recognize, you know, Nontobeko was here. Those women are doing their own businesses, small ones as they may be, but nobody makes available to them the resources. There's no loaning for them. Microfinance is a huge change maker. And I think if we get to that space and realize that the majority of women could easily lead powerful, sustainable, healthy, good lives, and contribute immensely to the economy of this country by just borrowing them 5,000 and 2,000 rand, because they are involved in those businesses. So that for me is another big one. Training is another important element. It is important to say, we keep on saying they are illiterate, they do not know, but their skills are there. Let's take them to the people. I'm very proud of the organization that I'm part of, that they don't teach literacy using just pen and paper. They use computers. You've never seen that. But you should find the women who don't know how to write using computers to be literate. I found it very impressive, and I'm very, very inspired. So I think inclusion is a big, big, big issue. And there is a lacuna in the legal system of this country and the policy system of this country we do not have a specific policy that addresses the women I'm talking about, and we're appealing for that lacuna to be dealt with.
Thank you so much, Ria. Shall we go to Lebogang, Tejumola? I haven't forgotten you. We're going to have you just after Amanda. So, yeah, you can hear us and we'll get your input. Don't worry. Lebogang?
Yeah, thank you. I think I think we need to start thinking about how was the economy constructed in the first place? And who does it include and who does it not include? And I think for me that is a very important point of departure, because in fact, the economy is structured in such a way that the women's contribution to the economy is not counted, nor is it acknowledged. And that is the economy of care work. If all women who we call unemployed, who are in care work, who are domestic workers, would stop working for 1 week, the economy would collapse. And so the first thing we need to speak about is how was this economy structured in the first place? Because until we take that view, we are always going to be looking for things at the periphery that women can do. And I'm saying you need to disrupt the design of the economy in the first place. Firstly, to value women's work. What is the value of the women who are looking after children? What is the value of the women who are left in rural areas historically, when men left not only rural areas in South Africa, but when Hugh Masekela was talking about Stimela and spoke about the men that left rural areas, what was the cost of that? What is the cost of the unseen emotional labor that women do and are not compensated for? So in fact, I want to say and provoke us to be saying, even the very understanding of what is the economy and how it is structured is highly problematic, because it is patriarchal and it is heteronormative, and in South Africa it is racist. And so until you confront those realities and say, what are the ways in which we can reconstruct the economy, then women will always be on the periphery. Then women are not going to be part of decision makers in shaping a new economy. In January of every year, OXFAM globally basically produces the inequality report. And the world we live in right now is owned by 1% of the global population. So there is no way we are going to win, no matter how many programs and projects we can come up with, when we don't ask the question, where is the wealth for the 99% of the global population? Right now, we are sitting with the biggest crisis in the world, and that is climate justice. Climate change. The biggest polluters are sitting in the global north. The ones that are facing the worst forms of impact on climate justice are black women, primarily in Africa. And if we are still going to different COPs and we are not addressing an adaptation fund, a loss and damage fund that is going to recognize a woman who's got a small-scale farm in the Eastern Cape, a woman who's got a small-scale farm in Somalia, a woman who's got a small-scale farm, who, when the floods come, they must make do, but a company that is a multinational will actually have insurance. Who insures a small-scale farmer against the ravages of climate change that is man-made and that is caused by the major polluters in the global north, who themselves, they pollute, and they themselves, right now, at different COPs are sitting around the table and they are discussing how they are going to mitigate a problem that they themselves are starting, and those that are facing it are not around the table. So that's just an example of how we cannot speak about an economy without saying how is it structured. And by design, it is going to make women, queer people, youth, black women to be at the periphery. So yes, let us work at entering the economy, but let us ask a fundamental question: whose economy is it?
Powerful, powerful. Yes, really great. And thanks for Lebogang for bringing the marginal communities in and reminding us, about that inclusivity. Thank you. Amanda?
Yes, good afternoon. And let me just start by thanking you for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be here. So I want to ask, I do a lot of research on gender-based violence, and I want to ask this question: does economic exclusion cause social exclusion, or does social exclusion cause economic exclusion? And I think it's a vicious cycle. But if we look at the statistics for violence in South Africa, which is over 45,000 reported rapes a year, and intimate femicide, 5 times the global average, the cost of that to the economy is between 28 and 42 billion rand per year. KPMG did this study in 2014, and it's money wasted. It's gone. We can't use it. And so the big issue here is how gender-based violence leads to exclusion from economy, and very often women lose their jobs. They sustain injuries. There's issues around care for their children, and so on. So we need to also think about how do we deal with gender-based violence. And if we go and look at the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence, it has got 6 pillars, and, of which accountability and leadership is one, response and prevention, another one, justice and safety, care and support, research and information management. But then it says economic empowerment. So it tells us that integral to dealing with gender-based violence is the issue of economic empowerment. And I think we need to think where money goes. I was a commissioner for the Gender Commission between 2012 and 2014. And in that time, I did a study on the subsidization for shelters for domestic violence with the Women's Legal Centre and the network of shelters in the Western Cape. And we did a study to show that the subsidization is far less than what is needed. And there are also not enough shelters. But that's always the institutions that stand last in line to be funded. And I think we also need to think about the Victims Empowerment Program, the Thuthuzela care centers that we need to establish. We have just, in Stellenbosch, done something that's not been done before. We have established a gender-based violence report center, which is it is a Thuthuzela care center, we just don't call it that, but with private money. And it is impressive in the sense of, on duty there we have a police officer, a social worker, a nurse, a psychologist, and also space for women to stay overnight. So these things we don't think of them as economic issues or financial exclusions, but they are. They are because somebody needs to fund those services, need to fund the people who work there, and also deal with the processes that cost money. Legal help costs money. Getting an interdict costs money. Taking people to hospital costs money. And those are actually costs that we cannot afford. But if we think about the 1 in 9 campaign that tells us that 1 in 9 rapes are reported, the Medical Research Council tells us that 1 in 25 rapes are reported. You do the extrapolation and you get over 1 million rapes a year. That is the invisible victims that we don't know or don't know that they are survivors of rape. But that is the cost, also the human and the emotional cost to the economy of this country.
Thank you, Professor Gouws. Thank you. So, Tejumola, you're hearing all these powerful inputs on your panel. So, where you're sitting in the continent, can you share some of your ideas on those fractures in society regarding rural women and the
Thank you.
livelihoods?
Thank you very much. Just confirm to me you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Awesome, great. Thank you to the organizers again for having me, and to the many speakers, Your Excellencies, everybody in the room. It's really a pleasure to be able to share my thoughts, especially when it comes to women economic empowerment. My name is Abisoye, and I'm a Muje leader of the Erling Johnson Sirleaf Center, a group of women in public service that are trying to change the narrative. So let me just simply put that my thoughts around women's exclusion from the economy is because the moment women become economically independent, we would run this show. We won't need the men. So they're going to try their best to make sure we don't get to the level we want to, so we don't have to run the show the way we know we'll do better things than the men, right? But I think when I think about the fractures and the issues in the economy, thank you very much. When I think about the issues in the economy, and from my side, I live in Lagos. I'm no longer part of the LSTTF, but I worked in government for over 10 years, building economic structures to support businesses, small, medium enterprises, and women businesses. And when I think about the economic issues and what is creating these exclusions, there are many, especially for women in rural areas. But I want to talk about the ones that have been repeated in this room already today, because I've been listening since the beginning. Property. In so many regards, women don't, in many cultures, not just Nigerian, I don't know how bad it is in South Africa, but women are not allowed to own property in some culture till date. So they don't have access to the kind of assets that can help them to build bigger and better businesses. We have issues around credit history or access to credit. That is another issue that women have to surmount. If you understand, a lot of our structures always ask women to access credit by providing collateral. If they don't have assets, they can't provide the collateral for the credit. The exclusion increases. And I think access to markets in the rural areas for connecting women to markets globally. The world is one global market now. And I strongly believe a farmer in Lagos or in Zamfara in Nigeria should be able to sell to a store in Zambia, in Namibia, in South Africa by getting the kind of education and access that allows her to do this. So we must never underestimate the power of education by ensuring that we're not only giving them financial literacy, but we're adding to that digital literacy. We're adding to that entrepreneurship skills that helps rural women build better businesses. McKinsey has showed us that if we include women in the economy in the world, we can increase, in the labor force alone, we can increase the economy of the world by over $2 trillion. If we support women businesses, according to the European Investment Bank, we can add over 160 trillion to the world economy. And we can, and data also shows that women businesses outperform the male ones when they have access to everything that is required. So there are a lot of fractures that when we think very critically about how to help improve businesses in the rural areas, I think we should strongly focus on education. the good, the bad, the ugly. Give it to them. Let us tell them what it is. When you get online, these are the advantages, these are the disadvantages of being online. When we say financial inclusion, let us tell them you can overborrow and be indebted for life. Let us give them the details, how to manage that. Let us give them access to markets. And let us help them begin to own and register property so they can get access to credits as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tejumola. Thank you so much. Speaking from great experience, helped to create over 100,000 jobs, 15,000 small businesses, and the training of 5,000 youth. It's a lot to learn, which takes us into the next question. And I think Lebogang is really getting us to really take account, of the brutal reality. And saying, whose economy is this and what should count? 80% of biodiversity is in Africa and the knowledge of it, but it is being capitalized in the north. And who's central to that knowledge and capital? Are women. We are in Africa. We had the young speaker earlier, and she spoke very eloquently and very powerfully, and she said, but we included in a cycle of debt. Is that the reality? And then Amanda Gouws really reminding us of the cost of violence, gender-based violence. And of course, we include queer communities in this, and everybody who is marginalized because it causes poverty. And so in the past, and we all know this, Umakulu and Osi used to be in charge of the livestock. They were in charge of the milk, they were in charge of the livestock, but their knowledge and that doesn't count as it used to. So how do we put capital and value to this? And perhaps there are models that Tejumola can share with us and others can share with us. So moving to the next question, and I just know about the research I've done, say on the rooibos deal in South Africa. It looked fantastic. But doing the research, the small-scale farmers and women in particular felt that they weren't listened to even within their own circles. And of course, apartheid, white capital very much controlling the rooibos. Young women left because there was no lalela. There was no listening. They left the dialogue because they weren't listened to. And they left the economy because they weren't listened to. Yet it's their rich ancestral wealth. And so in COVID also, we saw just the value of women in care work not counted. So I think that's a very important point. And so I'm going to start again with our very resourceful and insightful Ria. And then we can take the second question, which is, are there any rural development models across the space and time that we can learn from to support practical strategies that can support women and queer communities in rural Africa? And you can take the question the way you've prepared it and the way you want to do it, but just focusing on giving us some great solutions. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that question. And I'm going to rely on what I know, what has been delivered, what has worked. I heard most of the speakers this morning talking about the silent hard worker. She's like a duck. When you see a duck on a dam, you'd think it's just gliding. You don't know what is happening, and it's got no water on it because it's got silky feathers. When water pours, they just rolls down. The challenges as they come, they roll down. But if you had a microscope to see what is happening under the water, you'd find the feet of the duck working very hard. And this is no one other than my founder, Mbeki. So I'm going to talk about her model. I believe the WDB Trust is one of those models that have relentlessly and convincingly showed that something can be done in rural communities over the years. We are having a 4-pillar strategy on what we are doing in rural areas. The first one is what we call the psychosocial model. The women that were there looked all over the world and got to Tunisia, where they found a caravan model which was moving around the poor rural communities to take services there. We have mimicked that through what we call the Zenzele Development Program. It goes to the most rural. And as we say, there are assets even in those communities. What are we doing to make sure that we link these excluded women to the assets that they have there? They should be able to access the grants that are available in government. They should be able to use the land that they get from the rural chief. They should be able to be educated and trained. So that's what we're doing, because it's the first hurdle. We mount them on that pedestal to say, there is something you can do, hardworking women, pursue me in the rural areas. So that's the one part that we do. And we do a lot around that, and that's one part of the leg of the model. The second leg of this model is what it keeps on trying, microfinance, to look at loaning those women and assisting them and aiding them to be able to do what they do in the taking care of the milk, taking care of the cabbage, making sure that they can sow and do particular things, making sure that they can sell their fat cakes and buy whatever, and they grow as it goes. As I sit here, I'm very proud that we just got our NCR license, which means we can borrow even more. So that's what she's done here. And then we have another leg. Training, you talk about skills. If you don't have training to empower and train the women and enable them to be able to do best what they're supposed to assist them in their development journey, you'd be losing. So one of our pillars is training. We do all training for microfinance, for psychosocial issues, for any other thing that they would want to do to develop and get better. And then we have another one, the ZMDT, the Feminist Fellowship, because we're saying, yes, you can lead, you can be a CEO, you can be a principal of a university, but are you the woman leader? We are using the fellowship to say, go lead powerfully, but lead as a woman, using the best of your abilities and your qualities. So I do want to say there are models that can work, but be intentional, be deliberate, and go out there and do it. And I think it's about each one of us with our capabilities. Let's brighten the corner where we are. It might not be as big as it is, but each little thing that you do, whether you're Soul City, whether you're WDB Trust, whether you are OXFAM, let's just brighten the corner where we are and make it happen. In any case, why should we be defined by these models that are not working for us? Let us define our own models that work for us, that breaks all these cages that are enclosing us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Nkosi Kakhulu, and I think that big Nkosi Kakhulu to Mbeki, that wonderful work, and I think it's about sustaining that, and recognizing the strengths of it and not losing it. So,
and maybe just one little thing, sorry.
Yes.
To say, part of ensuring that you are defiant. WDB Trust is not borrowing money from anybody. They have their own investment holding that makes sure that they go and get the resources. It's not for profit, but it is for benefiting the women.
Great, and that links to the African Renaissance,
Yes.
and which was started long ago, and I think we need to get that back in South Africa. But that we're also speaking to the continent in the dialogue, so that's really,
Yes.
thank you, Ria. Lebogang?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak about 3 programs that we run that are looking at different models. So, we know that in terms of the recycling value chain, waste pickers are at the very bottom of that value chain. And it is estimated that in South Africa, we've got about 60 to 90,000 waste pickers. And for women, they work at night and their labor is not protected, and even what they can earn out of that work is really to just put food on the table to be able to buy bread tomorrow for children to go to school. And since 2010, OXFAM has worked with the Ekurhuleni municipality to integrate these women waste pickers into their waste management system. What they have done is to develop and start community-based enterprises and give them a formal license to collect waste in the city of Ekurhuleni. Through our partnership, we've managed to source and secure 83 million that is going to build a state-of-the-art industrial waste processing facility in Ekurhuleni. That is according to international standards, and it is going to be owned as a business. 70% of it is going to be owned by the waste pickers themselves, and Unilever will purchase from them as a business partner to waste pickers the pellets that they will use when they package some of their products. And it is one example of, for us, when we talk about a feminist economy, of how you can disrupt value chains that are there and ensure that women are shareholders in some of these businesses. The other, one of the benefits and the intentions of this is that it will move these women from informal, what we call the informal economy to the formal economy, but it will also reduce greenhouse emissions. The other one was started really by COVID-19, when many farmers had produce, but hotels and restaurants were closed. And it was really started by tech, and I really want to talk about how do we integrate tech in some of the solutions that we are looking for. And it was like, how do we link those that are hungry to those that have excess food? And One Farm Share started, and when you look at it from an economic point of view, there are, I must admit shamefully in some parts that I went to the Eastern Cape for the first time when I started working at OXFAM. And it was astounding how many women in the Eastern Cape have small holdings where they can farm. But the problem with integrating it in the food chain economy is the fact that to take cabbages, as an example, from the Eastern Cape into the major cities, you need special types of vehicles that will make sure that the temperatures are correct and stuff. So with One Farm Share, they used an app and trained women who've got produce to come together. So if per week they need 100 tons of fresh produce, the women can come together through the app and say, I've got 100 cabbages, I've got 1,000, I've got 10,000, I've got this amount. And it is One Farm Share that will go with the right temperature vehicles to go and collect across the rural areas in the Eastern Cape. But what is important about this is the fact that for export and for shops, there are standards in which they would meet. And if an individual or even a group of women were doing this on their own, they are likely to go to market with 1 ton of cabbages and only 20% is taken. One Farm Share will pay for every cabbage, whether it's taken into the market or not. And the ones that are not taken to the market, they will then redistribute nationally. And what they do, the minute they load, which is another thing in terms of some of these economic systems, when they load your cabbages, you get paid market money that very minute. You don't get paid after 30 days, you don't get paid after a day. The third one is an example of basically building resilience to climate justice in Madagascar and Comoros, where we've managed to include 27,000 women in basically building and replanting mangroves to make sure that those communities are sustainable. And it was by making sure that when governments think about building climate resilience, we ask them that the very intelligence and knowledge of women on the ground, not only is it harvested and extracted from them, and then the tenders are given to those that have the means to bid, but it is actually quantified, and they themselves form cooperatives that are going to get those contracts. And what the private sector comes is to come in as a minority partner and not the determiner of how all of those elevated roads and creating early warning systems for weather is going to come with. So those are the 3 examples I can talk about of models that we have instituted. Thank you.
Fantastic. So I've got 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. So Amanda's professor on safety, how do these models...
I will be quick.
Yeah.
But I think coming back to the issue of violence is that we need to start at the level of socialization of young children. I am often asked to go to women's schools, and then I start my talk to talk about sexual harassment. I start by asking the girls, whom of you think that you've ever been harassed? And then there are a few hands, 5, 6, 7. And then after I've gone through the spectrum of what is harassment and what types of behavior constitute harassment to the whole issue of sexual violence, and I ask them at the end, how many of you now think that you've been sexually harassed? Then it's over 80%. So they don't have the vocabulary to understand what happens to them, what happens to their bodies. But I am never asked by boys' schools. So we give the girls the vocabulary, but we do not talk to boys, and I think that's really important. And then when, I think I've done a study on attitudes towards gender equality, culture and tradition, and I was looking for a gender gap, whether men and women think about issues of culture and gender equality differently. And there is a gap, but there are also a lot of women, a large percentage of women who internalize those traditional role expectations that they don't challenge, and like not going into the kraal, for example. And I think activism, we shouldn't underestimate the role of activism. And the rural women's movement, Mam Sazani Ngubani, that unfortunately died of COVID, was such a good example and such a loss for us about what activism in rural areas can do to change attitudes and make women understand the importance of gender equality.
Thank you so much, Professor Gouws, Amanda. Tejumola, you've probably heard online. You just have about a minute or so to give input on the second question. Tejumola.
So very quickly, I'll just speak about what we did, which is around using social guarantees in rural areas rather than collateral. So we were able to lend to women in rural areas using social guarantees rather than collateral. So within a community, cooperatives were created. We also taught them, educated them using animation and local language. So we got translated content to be translated. We did pictorial learning, teachings for women who were literally illiterate. They've never gone to school. So we used animation to teach them how to use smartphones, how to sell on WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. And we saw 30% of all the people that did our programs actually increase their revenue within 6 months. So there are a lot of things that have been spoken about that I actually also agree with, but a lot will still have to do with our continuous commitment to building and increasing the size of the businesses that are coming out from the rural areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tejumola. So just from me, thank you so much. Great speakers, great input. I don't think we're going to have time for questions, am I correct? But just to say that I think if what we are saying here is the African feminist economy of the heart. The African feminist economy of the heart, that is what we've centered here today, and I think we've wonderfully through Mambeki's work and the other work from Geraldine and Dr. Brigalia, and I think we need to give them all a big hand and give our speakers a big hand and make this count as the big economy on the continent. Thank you.